This is one like, so if you care about like the workforce, if you care about labor, and you've been wondering why things are not as good as they were when your parents were your age or your grandparents were your age with the labor force, I think you're about to find out why. You see, friend of the show, Roger Meadows, he sent this to me, and I think this needs to be discussed. How college destroyed the labor market. Now, you may want to pause and say, huh? What? What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Actually, it does. Because you see, fam, the reason why we have some of the problems that we have in the job market today is because of some of the things that happen with the university system. We're actually going to start with LBJ. What seemed like a good thing at the time turned out to not be a great thing. Let's get started here. Again, this is how college destroyed the labor market. Check this out.
Beginning with Lyndon B. Johnson's Higher Education Act of 1965, which aimed to further democratize access to college by expanding federal financial aid to make higher education accessible to more Americans. The belief truly was that as a college degree almost guaranteed economic mobility, graduates would have no problem repaying the loans. But institutions quickly took advantage of this and began raising tuition, as students were now backed by the federal government. As a result, according to the National Center of Education Statistics, for the 1970 to 71 academic year, the average in-state tuition and fees for 1 year at a public nonprofit university was $394. By the 2020-2021 academic year, that amount jumped to $10,560. And
pause. Everybody look at this graph for just a second. Do you see what happened? So, and this is a warning that I've been giving to people. Whenever you push for some type of policy that is going to help the people, which I definitely support, you always have to have an answer to the way that the corporations are going to respond. People still call them schools. I told you before, we need to start calling them businesses. Because what they did after LBJ said, oh, let's offer federal financial aid. This way, people who are coming from families that can't afford to send them to college will be able to take out student loans to attend college. Now, back then, student loans were a lot cheaper than they are now. So just keep that in mind. So the business response to that is, okay, we'll just increase the tuition. This is another thing that people have brought up about Andrew Yang's UBI. When Andrew Yang says we need universal basic income, people ask the question, what is stopping businesses from increasing their prices after people get a universal basic income? What's stopping landlords from increasing the rent after we get a universal basic income? So what would be a way to answer that, right? To have rent stabilization. That way landlords can't do that. To have some type of law in place. That way businesses cannot increase all these prices because people are now getting $1,000 a month. So the colleges, which is a business, became pretty smart. And they said, wait a minute, now that we have more people applying to these colleges, that means we have to spend more time going through college applications. And now there are going to be more students in the classroom. So we're just going to go ahead and increase the tuition. This is how they've been able to limit the applicant pool, right? The more the government gives out, or the more federal aid that the government gives out, the more these universities increase their prices. Let's continue on so you can see how this affected the job market.
Increase of 2,580%. And as tuition rapidly increased, the importance of a higher education had taken root in American culture and coincided with the largest generation in American history facing yet another national conflict, the Vietnam War. Prior to the draft, the college entry rate of young men had increased from 54% in 1963 to 62% in 1968. Of the 2.5 million enlisted men who served during Vietnam, 80% came from poor or working class families, with the same ratio only having a high school education, as the draft allowed full-time students and graduates legal deferment. College campuses became centers for protests against the war, with professors and faculty beginning to criticize American policy, causing another ideology to form around education, led by California's newly elected governor and future president, Ronald Reagan. Just a few months after his election, Reagan publicly emphasized impending budget concerns, warning that high taxes would lead California toward an economic collapse, specifically in regards to the burden taxpayers faced with higher education. At the time, the University of California had been offering free tuition to California residents since its formation in 1868.
Pause right there. That's another thing I want to mention. People forget about that. When you hear people like Bernie Sanders say, well, we should have free colleges in the United States, don't forget that in California, at once upon a time, it was free for those who were in-state applicants. And I still say that to this day. Like, why do you, if you live in Massachusetts, why do you have to pay like $15,000 a semester for tuition at the University of Massachusetts? Why? You don't have to pay tuition to go through K through 12 public school. So why do you have to pay tuition to go to the University of Massachusetts if you're in Massachusetts? Let me know. I never understood this. Never understood it. Let's continue.
But in recent years, it had also become a national center of protests against the Vietnam War. Under the headline of solving California's budget crisis, Reagan proposed the introduction of tuition fees and began cutting public funding to universities by 20%. However, this was largely in pursuit of dismantling the resistance forming at public universities, with Reagan's education advisor, Roger A. Freeman, stating, "We are in danger of producing an educated proletariat. That's dynamite. We have to be selective of who we allow to go through higher education." Shortly after, every public institution in the nation followed Reagan's initiative. In 1966, American students took out $73 million in student loans. By 1981, when Reagan took office as president, that figure had grown to $7.8 billion.
Does everybody see that significant increase there? So I want people to understand how we got here.
By 1983, the U.S. Department of Education issued a nation at risk, stating the educational foundation of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity and threatens our very future as a nation. This open letter to the American people called for a complete reform of the public education systems, prioritizing more rigorous and measurable standards. Technical programs such as shop class were no longer seen as a priority in this newfound pursuit of higher education, and soon became reserved for the school's so-called troubled students, or those not suited for college.
And why is that, ladies and gentlemen? Why is it that these skills are at these, and people call them vocational schools, or alternative schools, but they're known as the schools that the kids who don't or have behavioral issues or don't do well at your regular K through 12 public school, they send them to those types of schools. When those skills, am I going this way or that way? Those skills should actually be taught at every school. Like it shouldn't, like my parents told me, like when they were growing up, they had shop class, like they took wood shop. And again, these were free skills that were taught to you in high school and middle school. So you knew how to build with your hands, like home ec. Actually, I had home ec in middle school, but then they got rid of that not too long after I took it. But as time went by, K through 12, they started to cut these budgets and they started to remove these programs from those schools. And that's why if you look around today, a lot of people don't know how to build anything with their hands. So these things did change over time. Now it's like you got to pay to get these skills.
This not only completely altered the nation's perspective of vocational schooling, completely ruining the balance between white-collar and blue-collar work in the labor force, it was also hurting the nation's education levels. Students who graduated from high school in the 80s learned 1.25 grade levels less than graduates in 1967. Today, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, math skills for 13-year-olds is at the same level it was in 1990, with readers scoring worse than in 1971. Ultimately, this pursuit in college preparedness led to high school just becoming a societal checkpoint, rather than a platform that provided students with marketable skills.
High schools no longer were preparing students with the skills that they needed to go out into the real world. Now, in order to get those jobs, you would have to go to a trade school or you would have to go to a university to get those skills, to get those jobs. When if you were back in my parents' day, you were taught those skills while you were in high school. You didn't have to pay for it. So this is how the labor force, how college has had an impact on the labor force, not in a positive way. I want you to think about those entry-level jobs for just a second. And this is something I noticed when I graduated from undergrad. That never made any sense to me, but later on, I understood how it worked. How do you have an entry-level job that is entry-level, but requires you to have 3 to 5 years experience? Let me know. How is it entry-level if they want you to have 3 to 5 years experience and you just graduated from college or high school? You see, that was another way to limit the applicant pool. That's another way to weed people out, because now you don't have to go through 500 resumes. Now you maybe only have to go through 100 resumes. And sometimes they would pivot from 3 to 5 years experience or a bachelor's degree. I'm talking about jobs that didn't require a college degree before. Why do you need a bachelor's degree for an administrative assistant position? I'll wait. Why? They train you. I was an administrative assistant. They trained you. Why do you need a bachelor's degree for that? We're talking about jobs that some of our grandparents, maybe even some of our parents did without a college degree, graduated from high school, got like a secretary. I think back then they were called secretaries. Like nowadays it's administrative assistant or executive assistant. They get fancy with the title, but same jazz. But you know, they taught you these skills. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to go apply for the secretary job and with no college degree. So why do you need a bachelor's degree to become an administrative assistant today? So do you see what is happening? What has happened over time is that they have increased the requirements for entry-level positions that back in the day, our parents and our grandparents could have gotten those jobs without a degree. So now you have to go to college just to get that entry-level job and to get those full-time benefits. But if you took out student loans, you're already in a little bit of debt that you got to pay back. And guess what? That administrative assistant job doesn't pay enough for you to pay off those student loans. Now you got to go get a second job. Let's continue on a little bit more. I think I want to fast forward to did I want to go to this one? Oh, this part right here. The federal government halted trading programs. I want to get to that part. Here we go.
On a federal level. In 1979, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, which provided job training for economically disadvantaged, unemployed, and those underemployed, had over $16 billion, or $69 billion when adjusted for inflation, in funding. Today, that original number, without being adjusted for inflation, has fallen by over 66%, with all federal employment and training programs having a combined $20 billion in funding. With the massive reduction of training programs on both a federal and corporate level, as well as the complete dismantling of entry-level positions and a national disdain for vocational schooling, college became society's one-stop shop for education and the skill sets needed for the modern workforce. And if you couldn't afford the increasing tuition, you're just out of luck.
You were just out of luck. And one more thing I want to bring up as well. We're going to fast forward to why they're not hiring these college graduates. Another thing I want to bring up as well. So you go to college to get the skills and to get that degree, to get what is going to be for a lot of people, these entry-level positions, but you're still not receiving a salary that is comparable to what your parents would have received at that time or what your grandparents may have received at that time. So that says a lot for the younger people today, the Gen Z people, even my group, millennials, Roger Meadows. I'm not going to forget about you Gen X peeps either. That says a lot, like for all of us that are a part of those generations, because the reality is we've been playing catch up, and you try to sit down and try to figure out why. And most of this is not on us. Most of this are the things that happened along the way before we were even born. Now let's go to this part right here. Why these employers purposely are not hiring the college grads. Listen to this.
Further from the truth. Out of a study of 800 hiring managers, 58% stated recent college graduates are underprepared for the workforce, just in entry-level positions. And according to Scott Detman, CEO of Avencia, a US-based career matching service for new graduates, hiring managers, instead of taking corrective action, have increased experience requirements by over 20% in just the last 5 years. And while I've made a plethora of videos going in great detail of how most hiring managers are just completely full of it, what we are seeing at large is that a college education truly is not granting the skill sets and education needed for the modern workforce, especially for how much it's costing. Nearly 47% of academic workforce is now made up of part-time, non-tenure track faculty, with 2/3 of them working as adjuncts, often juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet and ultimately diluting the quality of education. A survey of tenured professors showed 47% agreed that academic standards had declined, 33% had a reduced course rigor, and 37% openly admitted to inflating grades.
So we can go ahead and stop that right about there, because we're going to fast forward into what this means for younger people today. So again, I said they're businesses. These universities are businesses. They found a way of hiring people more cheaply and increasing tuition along the way as well. Instead of hiring all these tenure track professors, let's hire adjunct professors that don't get benefits, and we just charge them per credit that they teach. So if you get you teach 6 credits, you get paid for 6 credits. No health insurance, no dental, forget that jazz. If you want to take vacation, it's not paid vacation. I've been warning people about this gig economy and how we have gotten to this level. But make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, college has actually, all along the way, college has ruined the labor markets, because college made entry-level positions no longer really entry-level. That's how you go from entry-level with 0 to 1 year experience to entry-level positions that require 3 to 5 years experience or a bachelor's degree. Most people are not going to have the 3 to 5 years experience if they don't already have the skill set. So that means they're going to opt towards those that have the bachelor's degree. And then they know that you don't really have any experience because you just graduated from undergrad. So they have the excuse to pay you less. This is how this all has worked over the years. And I want to bring you to this story here. Shout out to Case Study QB, because we're talking about where young people are now. Young people struggling to meet the milestones of adulthood. Listen to this.
The Boss singing about growing up, but what about millennials? Moving out, owning a home, building a family? These used to be the markers for adulthood, but many of the 30 and 40-somethings of today say the standards of previous generations no longer feel attainable. According to the Institute for Family Studies, 1/3 of today's young people will never marry. Adults under 50 who say they are unlikely to ever have children has climbed by 10% in the last 6 years. A Wall Street Journal essay by Rachel Wolf raises the question, what happens when a whole generation never grows up? Wolf writes that amid steep declines in homeownership, marriage, and birth rates, economists have long been warning that young people are struggling to meet the milestones of adulthood. Although some 30-somethings are consciously choosing a less traditional path, many say these goals are simply out of reach.
The goals are simply out of reach, and part of the reason is because of what I just told you. Another part of it is because of capitalism, right? It's the capitalist system that allows those universities to increase the tuition the way that they did after LBJ decided to let's go forward with these federal student loans to give more opportunities for other people to go to college that would not be able to afford to do so. So the capitalist response to that was, let's increase the tuition. So just keep that in mind. And these kids today, it is true. Now, it's titled What Happens When a Whole Generation Never Grows Up. It doesn't mean that they didn't grow up. But what it is saying is that these goals that our parents and our grandparents were able to accomplish just everyday, part of life, these kids are not able to accomplish it. And that is because of what I just told you. College ruined the labor market. So what are these kids supposed to do? Where are they supposed to get the money for a down payment for a home when the home prices continue to increase and they're not paid a living salary, but they went to school because they needed to have the degree just to get that job in the first place. And they're underpaid and they have student loans. We have dug ourselves into a hole in this country. Can't speak for other countries. Some of these other countries, if you want to bring in the H-1B visa situation, as we said before, what did I tell you? A lot of these countries have free college. So if you're coming from a country that has free college and you didn't have to pay tuition, things are going to be a little bit different for you. It's a little bit different. So we have to point to this. We also have to point to another damn thing. Those of us that were around for the '08 housing crisis and were trying to find jobs during that time, that was also another time where entry-level jobs increase the experience that was required. And the reason why they did that is because the people who would have been maybe at that point where they could retire or move on, they decided to hold on to their jobs during the '08 housing crisis. So those people who were graduating from college at that time that were trying to get those entry-level jobs that I was just telling you about weren't able to get a lot of those jobs because people who were in those positions stayed in those positions instead of moving on because they did not want to risk not having employment during the '08 housing crisis. We are looking at generation after generation that has been trying to claw their way out of this hole. People need to know about this.
Joining me now is Richard Reeves. He's president of the American Institute for Boys and Men and author of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. Richard, nice to see you again. I cited some data. Is there one data point top of your mind that you think kind of sums up the issue that we're here to discuss?
Yeah, for me, it's the fact that men in their 30s and 40s now who don't have a college degree, half of them don't have children in their home. And so this move towards having men in homes that don't have children in them, particularly for working class men, it's like a very, very big change. And for me, Rachel's essay and data you've cited, it speaks to a change, an important change, which is the fact that these milestones aren't just being reached later, but for many people, they're not being reached at all. But we've gone from later, which in some ways can be a good thing, to never, which is very rarely a good thing. Like taking a bit more time to get educated, take your time to form a family, maybe get yourself financially settled, that's arguably a good thing. But that's not what's happening now. What's happening now is that these milestones, for many people, are just not being reached at all.
Very important point. There was a movie a couple years ago with Matthew McConaughey and Sarah Jessica Parker. What's her name, right? Sarah Jessica Parker. Yeah. There was a movie called Failure to Launch. And at that time, they were talking about the failure to launch phenomenon where these kids, they go to college and then they come right back home, but they never leave the parents' home. They get really comfortable there. You know, it's one thing if that's something that you're doing by choice, but more and more people are not doing that by choice. They're doing it because they can't afford it, right? They can't afford to get their own home. They can't afford to have an apartment without 4 other roommates. I mean, it's freaking ridiculous. You can talk to people even here in Massachusetts that were able to buy a home for $50,000 and they didn't have college degree. Now you have a college degree, you have student loan debt. The houses are 600,000, 700,000. The houses down the street from me, and I know they're crazy. They're trying to sell these houses for $800,000. I'm like, for what? For what? So it's unattainable. It's unattainable at this point. And when I look at the blue collar workforce, this is why I encourage people, young people, if you're listening, listen up. If you want to go to college, but you don't have the financial means to do so, and you would have to take out student loans in order to go. If you are not going into a profession where you're going to make at least, and I say minimum, at least $100,000 a year, don't do it. Go to trade school, go to community college, pick up a trade. You can become a dental hygienist while they still can before this stuff gets automated, because we don't know what's going to happen. There were people that used to work at the toll booth. They used to take your money and they give you a ticket. They were replaced with machines. So we don't know what's going to happen. But my advice to you is, if you are not going into a profession where you're going to make at least $100,000 a year and you have to take out student loans, don't do it. You are better off going to community college and, let's say, become a dental hygienist. That's only 2 years of schooling. Last time I checked, they were paying them $60,000 to start. You could do that. I am not going to tell you to go into the military, despite what some may do. Or the other one is the trade schools. The trade schools. Ladies, they need women welders. Believe it or not, they pay women welders more than they'll pay the men. They need you. You can go into welding. If you want to go into construction, carpentry, electrical, like, I'm just thinking of all the things that you need someone to do that you probably can't do yourself. Those types of jobs, those trade jobs, go into those if you know that you're going to end up in a tremendous amount of debt and you're going in a profession that's not going to teach or pay much. And speaking of teach, that means if you want to be a teacher and you know you can't go to college unless you end up with student loan debt, pick a different position, because teachers don't make shit. As someone that worked in education, I can tell you they don't make crap. It is a waste of your time. You don't want the headache. You are not just a teacher. You're a teacher, a babysitter, a counselor, and everything else. And everything else. So if you want to go, like, try to go into those fields. Someone in the chat mentioned pilots. That's another one. If you like to fly, you want to be a pilot. Again, these are still cheaper than what you're going to have to deal with if you take out all those student loans.
Okay, you anticipated my next question, which is this necessarily bad news? Might some of these individuals be happier in making a conscious choice?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. If you were to look at this data and say, look, this is people that have got lots of choice, they've intentionally said, look, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have kids, so maybe I don't want to do what my parents did, then you just say, sure enough, like, the old people can roll their eyes and say, oh, young people today, but that's just them doing it differently. But that's not what the data suggests. The data suggests that actually men in particular still want to have children, they still want to get married, they still want to form families. It's just that for some reason they're not able to. And I think that's a mixture of, it speaks a bit to the segment you just had with James Carville. It's a mixture, as always, of economics and culture. This is partly just, young men in particular feeling like they're not doing as well economically as they need to. But it's also, I think, has to be said, that there's a growing gap in many ways between young men and young women. We see that in politics, we see that in culture. And one thing I think we know for sure now is that a battle of the sexes is not great for the dating market. And you're seeing some of that playing out now. A third of men under 30 are not dating. 24% of men still living at home in their 20s, as you just pointed out. And so we're seeing some.
But he doesn't get to the real issue. The real issue is they can't afford it. They can't afford it. That's why. Like, he's trying to say, oh, well, these assertive men, they just can't find and no, the real issue is they can't afford it. So in all his research that he did and his book that he wrote, it's too expensive. Miss Kiwi knows exactly. It's too expensive to have kids. That's the thing. So people may want to, but can they afford to? right? So not everybody can. And, I've spoken to, like, a lot of my students were PhD and master's students, and they just couldn't afford it. Like, and that's just the reality. It's not that everybody says they don't want to. Some don't want to, but the reality is a lot of people can't afford it. So this is why I always bring up again worker cooperatives, because if college is ruining the labor force, that means in order for you as a worker to get back some type of power, it means that starting a worker cooperative instead of choosing to go work for the man is going to be the better option depending on what profession you're going into. Marco came onto the show a while back. He started a worker co-op for a tech company. He started a tech company with a group of friends, and it's a worker co-op. So we can talk more and more about that on this show, because I really encourage people. We really have to. That is one of the ways, and it's a nonviolent way that you can push back against the capitalist system, is through worker cooperatives. Crazy times, folks. Crazy times. Let's go ahead and go to some of the comments here in the chat. Thank you for the super sticker, FX Trader. Dwayne says, gasp, bite your tongue, Sabby. The Democrats say the working class has it great. Maybe that's why Trump won, LOL. Baby Ethernet says, without merit scholarship, most students are stuck paying $10K to $20K a year for the least expensive colleges. There you go. And Albat Witch says Lyndon Johnson was worth more than 15 million at his time, about 100 million in today's money, but I'm sure he wasn't a corrupt POS or anything. FM said Judge Joe Brown seems to forget he got free tuition at UCLA. Ooh, that's a good point, FM. Mama says, I'm learning lots of things from Sabby. Good. That is my goal. The Oracle says this nation was designed to function as a plantation, with education being restricted to the white elite and manual labor and trades to the poor and Black poor. Thank you, Stephanie. Preach, Sabby. I'm trying. Tabitha said, right, and older generations had a better standard of living than we do with less education. Bingo. Bingo. Itoli says WAPO, Washington Post, is laying off dozens of employees whose jobs will likely be replaced by AI. And that's another thing. That's another one. Thank you, New York Varsity. Must have 3 to 5 years of experience, bachelor's required, master's preferred. You got it. You got it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Giorgio resume, Old Navy salary. There it is. Roger says, thank you. Knew you'd love that, Sab. Let's get Damon Cassidy on. I can try. Dreamwalker says, do we still pay for people to go to school here from other countries? So the way it works with international students, undergrad students, master students, they have to prove that their parents can pay for those years of tuition before they are admitted here. So if someone applied for undergrad at like BU or whatever, and they're applying from China, their family has to prove that they can pay for all 4 years of them attending at BU. You see, they don't get financial aid. They don't qualify for it. So a lot of the international students that come to college in the US, their parents have the money to send them here. Now, when it comes to the PhD programs, they do give out fellowships. When I was at MIT, they gave out fellowships and research assistantships to those students. Those are basically grants or stipends a lot of times. And then later on, they'd get with a research team, and that faculty member's research team would take care of their stipend. But other than that, they have to prove that they can pay to come here. And thank you, Janice. Companies no longer offer on-the-job training because it's less expensive for them to demand a degree instead, which increases their stock dividends. It's a good one, Janice. That is a good one. Hey, hey, hey. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.